So I do want to introduce our special guest moderator who's going to moderate this panel on designing forward with AI. It's Tirza Hollenhorst. She's an entrepreneur and futurist. She's trained as a biologist and an engineer. Previously built a technology company, facilitated international cross-sector collaboration around corporate responsibility and environmental resource management. Tirza is the founder and CEO of Luman, one of our sponsors, and she brings her experience in business, neuroscience, and innovation together to transform organizations and prepare them for the future of work. So thanks so much, Tirza, for joining us.
And I'd like to welcome up the panelists.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. I'm amazed at how many of you have dedicated your entire Friday evening to come out. And then I got the chance to meet these incredible human beings, and I'm like, I would have given up my week to sit with these people, because the sheer care for humanity combined with intelligence and just incredible thought that all three of you have brought to us today is just, it's really mind-blowing. And I think all of us have sat through lecture after lecture where at the end we're like, did I learn anything there? And each one of you, I actually got to look through your presentations, and I learned something, and then I learned something again. So I'm really excited to be able to sit here with all of you. And something I was really struck by in listening to you is how fast AI and machine learning and this whole world has moved forward, and how big of a gap has opened up between the leading edge and even those of us who might think of ourselves as early adopters. And I'd love to hear from all of you what you think the role of designers is in supporting not just the innovators, but those kind of early majority, and then the rest of us who are just like AI, that don't even know what that stands for, and actually interfacing with this new reality in a way that's empowering and playful, and comes from this place of deep care for humanity. You're first, Christian.
I'm partly laughing because we stole the chairs from Elizabeth and Bill. So thank you. Thank you very much for the warm chair. I really loved what Amin was saying about playfulness, because I think it's important. I know you noticed that my talk wasn't very playful, but I'm actually a very playful person. And there's some part of this that's not play. But at the same time, great parents are playful, and I think that, you all are going to be, as I say, the teachers of this machine learning and stuff, and then the rest of the people, what Tirza was calling the muggles before, are going to be like the parents of this machine learning. And right now there's a kind of weird fear, like even our smartest people, like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, have this kind of fear around the machine learning, and I don't see that. Like, I don't see a general intelligence rising up and killing us all in the near future. And so I guess what I want to say is, like, as parents, like, how can we engage and take a more playful approach? And if we were to parent as if we were afraid that AI would, or as if we were to parent as if our children were to take our jobs, amplify our biases, and kill us all, we would be horrible parents. And as I was saying, the consciousness really matters. So I think that's true with machine learning. Like, if we were to treat the machines like that, then our worst selves are going to come out, and then machine learning is going to amplify our worst selves. That's my nightmare scenario. It's not that they get smart, it's just that they get dumb like us. So that's I'll leave.
Yeah, I feel like a couple of the different areas that I've often resisted in my career as a designer are becoming really important for addressing this particular time. And one of those is really starting to build literacy around business. And because I think where the good decisions and the bad decisions are made is often at the business level. And that was one of the reasons I kind of called out really trying to educate our business leaders around the impact of AI, because it's, I think it's really easy to see the value of all of this and see how easy it is to generate value and just kind of unleash this kind of crazy toddler on everything. And it really hasn't developed any sense of what's right and wrong, and it's just about about optimization. And so our role as being the kind of empathetic center really is important in kind of guiding this process. And it often means getting in the room with the business leaders and kind of duking it out, which is kind of a new challenge for me.
On a small scale, I would say stick to your UX principles. So meaning that, don't fool the user in thinking that the robot is a human, right? Like visually signify that this is artificial intelligence. Make sure to not leave a false sense of trust for the machine. So, highlighting things like confidence intervals or likelihood. So just sticking to the UX principles, I think on the small scale, on an everyday level, is something that we can do to at least serve our end users. Another thing, what Christian and Evan just mentioned is, really having a seat on the table. I think as design, we kind of move more into service design-esque type work as well. We understand the dynamics in which the organizations that we work in operate. So we understand to, a BI person, there's a legal person, and this person works with this person. We do it all the time in the work that we're doing, so we can do a similar thing to connect all the right people to have the right conversations at the table.
In thinking about I love the Declaration of Human Rights and how you brought that in, and this idea that was kind of the principles and the guiding principles as being more important. And after the Declaration of Human Rights, we had this incredible flourishing of civil rights and women's rights, and then even on to what we've seen in terms of gay rights and trans. There's been this like huge wave of expression in humanity and creativity that really did kind of pivot in that moment. And we've seen those principles like guide us in a direction forward, but then also we've seen laws enacted to kind of become the baseline underneath it. And similarly, to bring it into maybe this community, Burning Man was this incredible like anarchic festival, and in 1996, bad things happened. And they went forth and put forth kind of the floor of some laws and some rules that we're all going to follow, and then a set of principles that have actually enabled that culture to really grow both as a festival, but then expand way beyond the festival's limits into this huge flourishing of creativity and arts in cities and interactivity. And I'm curious how you guys feel about this, like the coming regulation, and if there's a way to create a floor that keeps bad things happening and a set of principles that guide us toward a flourishing and a creativity and a furthering of what is possible.
I think it's great. I mean, this is, like I said, this is really in flux. I was just writing down the 4 things that Mark Zuckerberg had called for: regulations on a definition for hate and harmful content, protection of elections, well, he didn't call it liberation, he called it portability of data, and then like a framework, for everyone to understand this kind of data and privacy stuff. Like, that sounds good. That's actually not too different than what the EFF called for. I don't doubt that Facebook's then going to turn around and put $1 billion in lawyers and lobbyists to shape it, but it's it's good. Like we're not at war about this stuff at the moment. Is that? Yeah. I mean, we're getting closer.
Yeah, I think I have a couple thoughts. One is, I do worry a little bit about regulation in terms of how it impacts smaller companies that are trying to innovate. Big companies can deal with big regulatory oversight, and they already have quite a bit of data and understanding for a small organization to actually enter and be competitive. Regulations can often really suppress that. I think another thought is, in terms of data ownership, there's definitely a lot of talk about data ownership, but then it's also how you make that actionable. And one of the challenges there is, how do you create a level playing field where you don't create kind of a battle between kind of different bots trying to kind of outsmart each other. And so, having some sort of neutral level playing field for, all of this data to exist and to be exchanged is a really interesting challenge.
What's interesting to me about regulation is that just because regulation exists doesn't mean that the problem is solved, right? You see that with compliance and security regulations that exist today. The largest companies that are right here in Silicon Valley have friends that are auditors or easily pay people off. So that's not, that's the answer. And again, to Amin's point, it hurts smaller businesses more than large companies with lots of monies. So I actually don't have a good answer. I guess I would go with the Mark Zuckerberg that you had, because now I don't trust regulation as much as as I hoped so in the past. Even with GDPR, Google just recently got an infraction, but it's no big deal, right? And I'm sure other larger companies have as well, but we've never heard about them. So.
I was just going to say that I think the important thing is to dig into this and engage with it, because this is, like I said, is all in flux, and leaving it to the progressives and libertarians to kind of debate and then see how that plays out. Like, this is all within our means to actually help define, and so we can bring that human-centeredness to this argument, and debate that's being shaped right now.
Yeah, I love your call to action, Christian, to just engage with it. And on the theme of engagement, can I get our runners to send our question box out there? I'm guessing that some of you have some questions for these amazing humans. Go ahead and raise your hand if you do, and the question box will come your way.
Here we go.
Yep.
Whoa. It's phone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's cool.
Hi, everybody. I'm just curious about functionally the designer within the process of algorithm development, how they can get in and question assumptions and actually get the developers to document the assumptions, because designers are always so good at documentation.
I'm sure my colleagues have. I just add something quick, that I think it's the same thing as 20 years ago when we were trying to figure out what it was we were building, as well as just building the thing. They wanted us to make it pretty, and then we said, no, but what is it that we're making pretty, right? And now we're very ensconced in that conversation about value propositions. The other thing I'll add is I've heard several people, actually since the talk I gave in Seattle, come to me and talk about meetings they have around policy. And there are lawyers in the room, and sometimes the lawyers are in there to protect things and point things out and explain issues. And other times, in some of the big tech companies, the lawyers say, nobody write anything down. This is a meeting where there's no recording, right? And you're like, whoa, how can we progress? We want to make a Google Doc. No, And so there's something interesting happening in that.
Do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because previously when I worked with AI, I worked at a startup, and now I work at Netflix, so transparency has always been a fun. So I can easily go to a data scientist and say, okay, let's document this algo, whiteboard what's going on. So I guess transparency is a heart of it, and I understand culturally, Netflix is a little different, where all of our sensitive legal information, everybody in the company has access to sensitive information. So it's not really like an issue. So I don't know how I would do in a restrictive environment.
Yeah. So one thought there is I feel like often it's not up to the data scientist or the data engineer who's actually writing the code to actually determine the outcome. Sometimes the outcome is, one of many options, and it ends up being kind of decided on another level. So it's not always the engineer who's actually kind of like understands exactly how it's going to be used, and it's they have some sort of clear goal or some kind of set of optimization functions that they're writing against, but they actually don't know exactly how that actually plays out. So I think one thing that designers can be good at is seeing the big picture and taking a bit of a step back and asking the right questions. So that's how my approach.
And I think another part of that question is somewhere in the algorithms is embedded this, the theory of profit, right? So assuming it's a for-profit company, we've got push companies, we've got pull companies, we've got product companies, among Apple, Google, Facebook, right? Try and figure out which one's which. And somewhere in there, there's a profit assumption. So understanding that and how it plays out in the algorithm you're talking about is a really important aspect of having to have a deeper dialogue about what you're doing, right? Rather than I like this and that person likes that. It's like, okay, I see, we're trying to achieve profit through this thing. Through engagement is like the large one. That's been the large one since the web started, right? And it goes back to advertising and TV and everything else. And so like trying to understand how that exhibits, maybe it's directly through a KPI that your profit or your bonus is held to, right? Or it might be more subtle and embedded somewhere. And then I think we can get really creative about how we serve people. Like there's ways to turn these models on their head. And if it's not one of the big 9 AI tech companies in the world, then maybe it's the next one you start with somebody else who says, hey, let's actually look at this from a human-centered point of view, and we're going to flip the whole market upside down, or something like that.
Exactly. One more thought. There's an interesting, thought that we've been tossing around for a while as we've been just thinking about, the objectives in our own in the software we're building, and if you ask a learning system to understand how you generate the most profit, there's the question of well, in what amount of time, right? And if you say in a week, then it's going to really focus on how much profit can we drive in a week. But if you say a year, or if you say 5 years, it'll actually start to factor in the importance of that customer sticking around, right? And then it kind of changes the conversation to how do we get the customer to stick around versus how do we drive really short-term incremental profit. And I think that's a really interesting role that machine learning can play, is that you can actually have it focus on long-term objectives that no kind of business people have the capability of doing. And it kind of changes the conversation quite a bit.
Well, throw that catch box.
Yeah.
That thing's awesome.
We got one way in the back there.
It's a big heat.
Yeah, maybe run then through.
You got startup founders, right?
Oh, this is the microphone. Oh, cool. I had a question kind of in line with the sort of UX principles of transparency, of like system status and being honest with the user about what the system can do. How much responsibility do you think these companies have towards educating the user about AI and ML and how it works, how it learns, how the whole system functions and what it's doing?
Not much responsibility, I guess. I mean, I think it's up to us to really enforce that, especially if we're working on the application itself. I've personally have struggled with getting data scientists to return kind of these really important signals that I feel like would serve the user, but there's always a compromise. I think a recent example is that we were using a neural net model for predictions on NDA, can't tell you predictions on, but the AI was basically not mature enough, and the data scientists were not very clear in terms of the output of like basically they couldn't trust the signals that the AI was returning in terms of what it actually used in the model. So it was pretty at its infancy. So what we ended up doing was we ended up doing like a whiteboarding session. I was like, look, like, so what kinds of data goes into it? And from my research, I was able to say, well, these, I don't really, for now we can't really, we don't understand the influence that data point had into that model, but at least we can say these are the types of data that went into this prediction to at least give some sort of transparency. It's not 100%, but there's going to be, compromises that need to be made. I don't think organizations or product partners or whatnot do a good job prioritizing these principles. So I think it's really up to us.
I think they're great. I think those are some of the things we can make transparent. And then a lot of people are trying to make the algorithms themselves transparent, but these algorithms are dynamic and they're learning and they're mysterious. Like they're deep learning, hidden layers. I don't think that's very explainable. Like we just can see that it works and we can measure that it works. But what we can make transparent is our learning objectives. Like what are our assumptions when we created this calibrated data that we trained it on? And I don't know how much, probably to various degrees that's being done in various companies. But the more we could expose that, I think it gets to that principle of transparency in UX. It's like, this is what we tried to do. This is what we tried to teach the machines. We think we're doing a good job. We're 98% accurate at detecting tumors and x-rays. But making that transparent actually helps source in the rest of the world and helps maybe do some corrections that are needed.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think we do need to develop kind of well-defined UX framework that has a correlation to the sensitivity of data that's being used, so that if there is, something that is sensitive or it's leveraging data that's sensitive, that there is some way to infer, how this is all happening. And so, having a kind of clear and understandable interpretation for anything that is leveraging sensitive data, I think is really important.
And something that I at least saw in kind of the subtext of what you were saying, Amin, is that if we actually make it more transparent to the user what data is going in, what our assumptions are, like, and how we're coming up with things for them, and we actually empower the user to interface with that we'll actually get better products, that the user will actually tell us what they want. And so if we make it more transparent to the user what's happening behind the scenes and the directionality of that they can actually make it better rather than just being a passive receiver. And putting the customer at the center of it all, which is kind of what we ostensibly want to do, will, by definition, empower them and give them more transparency. Anyway, I think we have time for one more question.
From the live stream, actually.
Oh, from the live stream. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Hi, everyone. So we did get one question. Let me just pull it up. From our live stream, and it's actually specifically for Hannah. Someone was really interested in one particular slide. So Suyash was saying he loved your X and Y axis and wanted to really know a little bit more about what you think are the pros and cons of fully agentive design.
The pros and cons. I guess I think agentive design has a place. It has a home. So, like, example, like a Roomba. Well, there's no machine learning in Roomba, but say a Roomba or Nest. Like I think it's a good thing. But I struggle with autonomous vehicles a lot. Even though it's cool, but I worry about the people that do drive for income all the time when I think about it. And so, taking my bias, I would look at that as a con, but it's a gray area because it's also serving people that, that are blind, for example. So, so I guess it really depends on the context. It could be all pros, it could be all cons. I usually like to stick to agentive design for strictly procedural tasks that the users don't want in their life. So when I was in cybersecurity, like some of these organizations are dealing with hundreds of thousands of systems that they have to manage. And it's incredibly stressful. So to be able to automate some of that out for them through agentive design is a huge pro. So I like to focus on really the pain points and only design if it's obviously a pro.
I think that's it. Thank you all so much. Let's give a round of applause for these amazing speakers. There's going to be a happy hour. Do you want to have some words on that? And I'm just going to add